It's from Luke chapter 1, the Song of Mary, the Magnify. In those days, Mary set out and went with haste to a Judean town in a hill country, where she entered the house of Zechariah and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the child leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit and exclaimed with a loud cry, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And why has this happened to me, that the mother of my Lord comes to me? For as soon as I heard the sound of your greeting, the child in my womb leaped for joy. And blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her by the Lord." And Mary said, "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. For he has looked with favor on the lowliness of his servant. Surely from now on all generations will call me blessed. For the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. His mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, according to the promise he made to our ancestors, to Abraham and to his descendants forever." Grace and peace to you all, in the name of our still-speaking God, who loves us just the way that we are, and who loves us too much to let us stay that way. Will you pray with me? May these words of my mouth and may the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O God, for it is you who is our strength and our salvation. Amen. At this point, Mary is at the end of her rope. At this point, it would not take much. Just a word, just somebody touching Mary on the shoulder and asking, "How's it going? How are you doing?" And Mary would have lost it. She would have broken down, fallen apart in tears, and admitted how scared, how absolutely terrified she was. Mary is pregnant with her first child, which is a scary enough proposition for any new mother to be, right? That alone will give you some stress and anxiety your first pregnancy. But Mary has bigger problems than just first baby jitters. Much bigger. Because Mary is pregnant and unmarried. The people of her village, the members of her own family, even Joseph, the man to whom she is pledged to be married, they would all be well within their rights to drag her outside the edge of the village and stone her to death. It's right there in Deuteronomy chapter 22. An unmarried woman, pregnant, can be stoned to death. That is a lot to place on the shoulders of this impoverished, minimally educated young woman. And that is saying nothing of all of the supernatural elements of the story, right? That she has been visited by angels, that she is pregnant as a virgin. about stress, anxiety. Mary is scared. She is terrified. And so Mary does what most of us would do if we were scared. Mary turns to someone that she thinks she can trust. Mary turns to family. Right? She runs away to the home of her cousin Elizabeth. Elizabeth, who is also pregnant with her first child, a child that she thought she would never have. Elizabeth believed that she was barren, that she couldn't conceive. Perhaps, Mary thinks, this trusted and beloved cousin who is also pregnant and who would therefore also have some idea of what it is that Mary is going through might be able to help, might be able to comfort her. Perhaps, Mary thinks, Elizabeth will have some idea of just how scared she is. And Mary is terrified. Terrified about birthing and caring for and raising a child. Terrified that her fiancé Joseph will refuse to marry her when he finds out that she is pregnant with a child that is not his. Terrified that she might have to raise the baby alone without financial support, or worse yet, terrified that she might be killed in the name of protecting the honor of her family. And so in the midst of all this panic and uncertainty, Mary comes to the door of her cousin Elizabeth's house. Mary opens the door. You can almost imagine how timidly she would call out, "Hello? Anybody home?" And as soon as Elizabeth hears Mary's voice, she tells Mary that the baby, Mary's baby, is the Messiah. Somehow, Elizabeth is able to sense that there is something special about Mary's unborn child. And so Elizabeth cries out, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb." That you are the mother of the Lord, Elizabeth said. Mary has come to Elizabeth's house. She has escaped to Elizabeth's house, and this is the greeting that she receives. If you think about it, I'm not sure that's going to make Mary feel any better. Right? Oh, by the way, Mary, your baby is the Lord. He's going to be the Messiah. That is a lot of pressure. The first thing that Elizabeth says to Mary is just as likely to increase her panic as it is to relieve it. So, Mary is scared. And how is it that Mary handles all of this fear, all of this uncertainty, all of this anxiety about the future and what the future holds? What does Mary do in the midst of all of this uncertainty about the future? Mary sings prophecy. Mary sings a bold prophecy, a prediction for the future. Mary declares that God is going to bring the powerful down from their thrones and lift up the lowly. Mary prophesies that God will be sending the rich away empty while he fills the bellies of the hungry. Mary, despite all of the uncertainty in the midst of her life, declares with certainty that God's promises are going to be fulfilled. Mary prophesies that things in this world have gotten out of whack, that things in the world are upside down, but that God is going to set them right side up again, and that some way, somehow, the baby that she is carrying, this baby who will be named Jesus, he is going to make that happen. It's remarkable, isn't it? That in the midst of all of this doubt and fear and uncertainty about what the future holds, Mary sings this prophetic song about what the future holds. That the future looks bright, that God's promises are going to be fulfilled. That she is able to have such faith in God's future in the midst of all of the problems of the present. Now, you might say, well, this is just a story. I mean, when Luke was writing his gospel, he could have told this story any way that he wanted to, and that's certainly a warm, fuzzy version of the story, right? That somebody who is in the midst of all of this doubt and uncertainty about what the future holds would nevertheless make a bold proclamation that they believe that God is still in control, that they still have faith in God and God's power and God's future. I mean, that's a great story, but it's an easy story to tell. It's much harder for you and me to do in real life. It's much more difficult when you're in the midst of it. In the midst of all of that doubt and fear and uncertainty about what the future holds, to nevertheless place your faith in God's future. But the thing is, sisters and brothers, this is not just some story that Luke is making up as he goes. Because Luke is living out this same story himself in his own life. For Luke, this is not an easy story to tell. This is an incredibly difficult story to tell. I imagine that he struggled for a long time to tell this story this way, because just like Mary, Luke himself is in the middle of a situation filled with fear and anxiety and doubt. Because you see, when Luke wrote this story, Luke himself, he was scared. He was absolutely terrified. Because just a couple of years before Luke sat down to write this story, the temple that was God's dwelling place on earth was destroyed. The Roman army had responded to a Jewish rebellion in the way that Roman armies always responded to rebellion. They destroyed the temple. They laid siege to Jerusalem and they destroyed the temple. And the temple was the center of Jewish life and worship, but it was so much more than that. See, the Jewish people, they believed that the temple was actually God's dwelling place on earth. What would it mean to a devout Jew that the Romans were able to destroy God's house while God was inside it? What does that mean? Does that mean that God has abandoned his people? That is the very question that Luke and all of the Jewish people had to struggle with. That was what was terrifying Luke about what the future held. And yet, when Luke tells Mary's story, he does not let an ounce of that fear and uncertainty creep in. When Luke tells Mary's story, he tells of a Mary who is confident in God's future despite the uncertainty of her present. Even though Luke has witnessed the powerful Roman army destroying the holy temple of God, even though Luke has witnessed once again how the oppressor consistently brutalizes the oppressed, Luke tells of a Mary boldly prophesying that one day the powerful and the proud are going to be toppled from their thrones and the lowly are going to be lifted up. Even though the Jews find themselves without a spiritual home and their capital city laid waste, Luke tells of a Mary who declares that the rich are going to be sent away empty even as God fills the bellies of the hungry. Luke prophesies that these things in the world which are upside down are going to be set right side up. And Luke, even though he himself never actually met Jesus, never actually laid eyes on Jesus, Luke is certain that somehow that baby born of Mary is going to be the one to do it. This is not an easy story for Luke to tell, because Luke is living it out himself. When Luke wrote his gospel, all the evidence in the world seemed to say that the proud and the powerful will always be on their thrones. That the Romans will be able to continue to get away with doing whatever they want, whenever they want. That they will be able to come in and take food from the tables of the poor to fill their own bellies. That's what all the evidence that Luke has to go on suggests, and yet that is not what Luke believes about the future. That's not the story that Luke tells in his gospel, and that is not the story that Christians tell. The story that we tell is that the things in this world which are upside down will one day be set right. The story that we tell is one of having faith in God's future despite all of the problems of the present. The story that we tell is one of reconciling and redemptive love. And even though we have never met Jesus, never laid eyes on him, we too tell the story that we believe that in some way, somehow, Jesus is going to be the one who will set the world right. And all of the evidence points to the contrary. We live in a world in which half of the world's population of 7 billion people lives on $2 a day or less. We live in a world where in the course of the 1 hour that we are together in worship on Sunday morning, 1,000 people will starve to death. And yet, the story that we tell is that one day the rich will be sent away empty, and the hungry will be filled, and that some way, somehow, Jesus is the one who's going to make that happen. We might live in a world in which nations exert their will over one another with armies and with nuclear weapons. We might live in a nation where less than 1% of our citizens are millionaires, yet more than half of our legislators are. And yet the story that we tell is that one day the proud and the powerful will be knocked down from their thrones, and the lowly will be lifted up, and in some way, somehow, Jesus is the one who's going to make this happen. We might live in a country where it is easier for mentally ill people to obtain assault rifles than it is for them to obtain mental health care. But the story that we tell is one in which everything that is wrong with the world is somehow going to be put right again. And that somehow Jesus is going to be the one to make that happen. On those days when you find yourself saying, I just can't watch the news anymore. It's just all bad. Remember Mary's uncertainty, and yet in the midst of her doubt and uncertainty and fear, that bold prophecy. Remember that in the midst of Luke's fear about what the future held for his people, he too was able to maintain his faith in God's promises. Remember that though the arc of the moral universe is long, it bends towards justice. And you don't have to be afraid of what's happening in our world today, because some way, somehow, Jesus is going to set our world right again. Because Jesus is in our world today and is reconciling this world to himself. Thanks be to God. Amen.